both of us feel a certain limitations with heritage Buddhism when it's status quo. It's not engaging in that really fires me up. Having said that, I think this is also why we are trying to work around some sensitivities about how we frame this as in heritage Buddhist issues. There's a lot of danger in inadvertently causing this idea that heritage Buddhism is inherently conservative, inherently patriarchal, because it has a middle class support, at least among certain East Asian, because they're different, the Southeast Asian heritage Buddhist communities, diasporic communities, and the East Asian heritage communities in what I know, and it was similar in Australia as well. They have different affordances. They're positioned differently socially. They face different kinds of erasure, different degrees of harm, and they wield different degrees of relative privilege. We wanted to give this focus to heritage Buddhism because there's a lot of sensitivities and complexities around that. Even as we both express that we feel certain limitations, there's something to be honored about this. It's also important to allow heritage Buddhists to be that way without seeing that as an inherent flaw. What prompted us to want to explore this project is because we organized this workshop for the Mind and Life Institute last year. This was held at Mangalam Center at Berkeley. So Mushim Ikeda was there, David Loy was there, Doshin, Beth Berla, Don Haney, there's Jack Petranka from who's the director of Mangalam Center. Next to him is Ron Purser, Peter Doran from Ireland, and Rhonda McGee. Funi was also invited. Essentially, we wanted to, with this working rubric of making refuge, which is understood as the task of creating the conditions of trust and safety for living and dying well together. The idea of refuge was inspired by the Buddhist idea of taking refuge, but we speak of it as making refuge, as something that you have actively craft by building conditions of trust and safety with one another. The pivot around this is to pay attention to how people of different positionalities are exposed to vulnerability in different ways. We're all choicelessly exposed to vulnerability we can't help it. There are different degrees of vulnerability in different situations. A white male middle-class person would not be exposed to the same degree of vulnerability as a POC, for instance. That's the main aim of our workshop, to get people from various backgrounds. We deliberately wanted to stage the event in such a way where it's nothing like an academic conference. We didn't want it to just have presentations. We wanted it to have a variety of activities. Uni couldn't attend. We made effort to invite people to bring an item to craft and author together. We want to approach it as a task of sharing vulnerability. We already had this plan to make the event one about learning how to share vulnerability with one another, but various circumstances happened which actually amplified things. Funi had to pull out, and Rhonda was facing a lot of grief as well. We started the event on a very, very, very raw and tender mode. Despite our efforts to have a good balance, it ended up in a situation where there was a dominant presence of white men. So the event started on a very tender note, especially for the women and POC. That is why it became more important to craft this, that all took the 5 precepts together. We worked with this set of guidelines that the EBMC have for intercultural exchanges, and we shared our access needs and these sort of things. And the people who felt anxious being in that situation made it a point to note their anxiety. Few people, myself included, noted that we're in this situation where it's a bit difficult because of the imbalance. So we noted that. Variety of sessions, some of them were presentations. Was a talking stick that Mushim brought with her on this Mushim session, where she led us in a sort of collective body movement to understand how it's like to address trauma. It was in the morning of the second day. There were 2 sets of practice session. One was seated meditation. Another one was a movement based with Mushim and Beth Barilla. Opened the second day with a work dedication ceremony. We asked Doshin to craft the ceremony for us. We also had a salad making exercise. So this salad making exercise was interesting because it was actually part of Funi's session, so I took it over from her. Her session had the plan to get people to think about a remark in the Lions Roar interview. I'm really not interested in targeting the person, but the remark was just indicative of the kind of casual erasure that happens all the time. So a remark that when they were asked, what do you think of criticisms of mindfulness from Buddhist people? And the person's response was, I think those criticisms come from Buddhist fundamentalists. You want to see watered down Buddhism, to travel to a country like Korea, where the temples are alive and well. What do you see in those temples? You see grandmothers and mothers sitting around shucking peas, talking about their children. These temples are mainly places for social gathering. How many people are deeply practicing? Are you devaluing the domestic labor of women, foreign women, elderly women who are there perhaps to cook for the monastics, perhaps to cook for the community, perhaps to make merit for their offsprings? These are the activities. Without women cooking, feeding the monastic, feeding the family, Buddhism would not have been passed down for 2,500 years. Men didn't cook. I'm pretty sure men didn't cook. The basic material needs need to come from some people's efforts. Funi wanted to use this as an exercise day. So I shared with them this story and I got them to shuck peas as I shared this story. And we thought, okay, since we've all shucked the peas together, why don't we all engage in a work practice of making a salad together on the second day? And then we'll order pizza to close off on a nice casual note to sort of, share hospitality together. And we did. We made a salad, but also what became very clear was, as you can see from this picture, which was taken by somebody else, and I think it was actually a nicely timed picture. What happened was the salad making exercise was clearly divided along white men and POC and women lines. The white men did not participate. Despite having a profile for being a Dharma teacher or mindfulness experts, they did not participate. What was observed throughout the sessions was similarly for the practice session as well. There was 4 of us here doing the sitting meditation in the morning of the second day. Mushim and Beth were doing some yoga stretches. The remainder participants, who were white men, did not participate despite the invitation to participate in shared practice. I have been critical about this, but Doshin is a much more practiced and kinder person than I am. He noted that it was a steep learning curve of white men of their positionality, accustomed to privilege. They didn't choose to be born as white men. They didn't choose to wield the affordances they have, but that's how they've lived their lives. I only had harsh words for them. To me, it's a total failure of white men. Utter total failure. But I accept what Doshin said. I'm not as good a practitioner as he is. Doshin was compassionate. He saw it as a combination of a steep learning curve, fear, aging. True, I accept that. This act of crafting a ceremonial space together, the act of taking precepts together, engaging in ritual together, a kind of a ritual that honors multi-lineages, from Buddhists to indigenous heritages to even Western intellectual tradition, and the act of not just doing serious stuff and not just doing serious meditation either, but just making refuge, being with one another, cooking together. And we found it to be a very powerful catalyzing activity. There was a lot more potential to explore that wasn't fully explored because of the imbalance of participants, which happened beyond anyone's control. That in itself was a good learning lesson. How can we do this, but do it next time with a more carefully considered participation so that we don't end up with these sort of imbalance? There are certain issues that may be easy for women and POC to share with one another, and it's just really tough when you have white people, especially white men, present. It's triggering. Through all these conversations, we knew we wanted to stage a sequel, a more carefully crafted sequel. What became clear was that, okay, first of all, something that really just focuses on diasporic Asian, heritage Buddhists, Asian American Buddhists, something that explicitly says this is for us because there are important conversations to be had amongst the heritage community. They're tough conversations that might help maybe younger generation heritage Buddhists who have been disconnected from their ancestry, disconnected for various reasons, disconnected because the customs don't make sense to them, disconnected because they are no longer they don't feel safe around habits of patriarchy and these sort of things, right? It's a sensitive issue. So that's an issue, that's definitely a conversation that those communities need to confront and have for themselves, just amongst themselves. There's always a risk that this impression is created that, Asians, East Asians or whatever are inherently patriarchal, are inherently conservative. And then that becomes, again, another excuse for their marginalization. Yet these are issues that need to be confronted. So if those issues are going to be addressed, it has to be a very safe container. These are things I learned from just speaking to Funi, for instance, because she's trained. That's her intellectual, and I would suppose also her Dharmic formation as an Asian American. I'm not an Asian American. While I can appreciate these things, I don't pick them up as quickly as Funi would. picking on these things, like to learn that as Asian American, all sorts of double binds, they face exclusions, but they're also part of settler colonization. So it's really tricky to negotiate these double binds. So the initial idea was to stage something just for people of diasporic Asian backgrounds. We have two options. One, to make it just a Asian heritage Buddhist thing and just totally for them, and that has to be kept as it is, because that's a safe space. We cannot include a smaller cohort of allies, which is fine, because it is a fact that within the community they are confronting issues that they need to address first. That's the first option, to make it an all Asian heritage Buddhist space. But we've come to discover that that wouldn't be true to the intention that Zack and I, we've taken vows together, we take vows together, we chant together, and that's how we crafted this intention. We are sort of thinking that, okay, that one, the first option, needs to be given its full integrity. And in order to give it its full integrity, it probably requires Asian Americans to be on a steering active role as well. Both Zack and I are not Asian Americans to begin with, so we're starting on the back foot. We could look for Asian Americans to join us, but that's additional work. So at this stage, we're sort of steering away from the first option, because I think that requires its full integrity to be pulled off for what it is. So now we are considering still working along the same objective, to give a main group of heritage Buddhist participants to take the lead in crafting various activities. But now we put it under a broader umbrella of heritage Buddhism and decolonial Dharma.